imagine that you're in Germany and it's 2015, right? So what's happening in 2015? It's not really about social media. It's not really about media at all. It's about Chancellor Angela Merkel making this really remarkable decision, which to my mind is the most striking example of how Germany is different than what many of us might have thought of Germany growing up, really since maybe Willy Brandt was in Warsaw and dropped to his knees. Angela Merkel making the decision that Germany would welcome in 1 million refugees, migrants, others, basically coming from the war in Syria, the war in Libya, and other places of trauma around the world. It was a major statement, but it was also more than a statement. It wasn't just symbolic. It was an actual policy that was changing Germany in many respects. And it reflected a changed Germany. So in general, certainly from outside of Germany, there was this deep respect for that. But what was happening in Germany at the time? Right, so think back to the summer of 2015, and you might think of that summer, you might remember some of those images. You might remember the image of a Hungarian camera woman kicking migrants who are coming across the border into Hungary. You might remember the image of Ayhan Kurdi, the young boy, 3 years old, who was killed in his effort to cross the Mediterranean in order to get to Europe, his face down on the beach. These were the images of that summer. And at the same time, many on the far right, the neo-Nazi right, and this strongly anti-immigrant right in Germany were starting to use Facebook and to a certain extent YouTube and Twitter in order to incite hatred against the immigrants, the migrants, the refugees who were coming into Germany. And so at the time, the Minister of Justice, who is now the Foreign Minister of Germany, Heiko Maas, he saw that and he started to get concerned, in particular because many of his constituents, many Germans, were writing to him and saying, why is it that Facebook will take down a female nipple, but they won't take down incitement to hatred? Right? What is that about? That isn't German values. At least that isn't German law. Right? German law has, I wouldn't say the strictest, but has very significant rules that are long-standing rules around the dissemination of hate speech, right? The dissemination of images of the Nazis, around criminal insult as well. And so Heiko Maas saw this. He was under enormous pressure, but he was also himself, I think, extremely concerned about the use of Facebook in particular in order to incite violence and incite hatred. And he wrote to Facebook and said, what's going on? Right? You are not doing what you need to do. You're not even addressing your own hate speech rules in order to deal with this major problem that is affecting our country. Right? This is a public policy problem for us. This isn't just a problem of what kind of content is on your platform. This is about what are you doing as a platform in order to deal with the kind of content, right, that is inciting violence in our streets. There were fire bombings of refugee centers. There were attacks on specific refugees and non-refugees. I mean, Germany is a diverse country, right? It's not as if someone on the far right can distinguish who's a refugee and who is a citizen of the country, right? So in that environment, Heiko Maas said to the companies, and this was basically to Twitter, YouTube, and YouTube, remember, YouTube is owned by Google. So it was Google, Facebook, Twitter, and Microsoft, I think at the time as well, invited them in and said, look, we need to fix this problem. And by fix this problem, he meant you need to do what I tell you to do. And so they created basically a non-binding code of conduct that the companies were meant to follow, right? And it was around hate speech. And in this non-binding code of conduct, the companies had agreed essentially to take down content that constituted hate speech under German law. That was their commitment. It was a voluntary commitment, a set of voluntary guidelines. And over time, Heiko Maas and his team at the Ministry of Justice in Berlin, they really thought Facebook in particular had betrayed them, right? That they weren't doing what they committed themselves to do on a voluntary basis. And so rather quickly, by early 2017, so this non-binding set of guidelines had been in effect for about a year. Heiko Maas didn't see much movement or incremental movement at best. And he told his team at the Ministry of Justice, you know, this soft law, this isn't doing the work. We need hard law, right? We need the hard edge of enforcement under German law. And what he did was he moved towards what we now know as the Network Enforcement Act. In German, it would probably take me 7 minutes to say it or pronounce it. We know it as NetzDG, right? It's the Network Enforcement Act in Germany. And NetzDG basically says to the companies, if you are of a certain size, if you make a certain amount of income annually, right, you will be subject to these rules. And these rules mean, one, you need to be transparent about what you're doing. You need to report to us, the government, every year, actually I think it's twice a year, about the nature of your takedowns of content. What are you doing to evaluate German laws? And secondly, if you do not implement, and this was the hardest edge of it, if you do not implement a new set of rules around hate speech and other rules of German law, if you don't implement them systematically, you'll be subjected to fines that could go up to 50 million euros per example. So they went from this non-binding set of norms to this real incentivizing of taking down content, right? And this German model, the transparency part is good, and I'll talk a little bit about transparency when I talk about some solutions. This hard edge sanction-oriented model is a model that has been seen as very attractive around the world. That part of the NetzDG model is basically spreading. It's traveling around the world. It has been somewhat resisted in Brussels. So the European Commission has been mainly focused on sort of the non-binding approach, similar to the first part of the German effort of Heiko Maas's effort. But that might be moving. There's a tremendous amount of pressure on the European Union to do something about hate speech, although after the parliamentary elections in Europe last week, it's unclear exactly the direction that will take. But there is enormous pressure from the leadership in Paris, in London, and in Berlin to do something stronger at the European level.